I'm Andy Schmuckler. In the previous video in this series, I tried to show that it's inevitable that there will be a lot of stories like the one leading up to us. I don't really know how inevitable it is, but there are so many planets. I imagine life. That there's a reason why self-replicating things become dominant on a planet. They're self-replicating, and everything else on the planet is not. So life is likely to take over a planet and create a biosphere. I think in a lot of places, given the almost inconceivable number of planets that we can infer are out there from the numbers of galaxies and times the number of stars in each one, and times what we can see about how ubiquitous planets are. So life emerges, and then it's inevitable that there will be a path, as life does its opportunistic thing, in the direction of intelligence. There will emerge more intelligent life forms over time, not because evolution is purposeful, but how is it even conceivable that the beginnings of life would be creatures like us? It's ridiculous. It took over 1 billion years, maybe over 2 billion, if I recall correctly, to get to the point where there is even a single cell that was as organized as every cell in our bodies. So it's not that life is seeking to become more complex. It just stands to reason that you got to start with something which is not super complex. You start with whatever it is that works. You start with the minimal it takes to be self-replicating, I think might be an okay way to put it. And then one of the courses as each thing originating from this branching process, which I do think is inevitable. I think biological evolutionists would agree that the system of life on any given planet would be increasingly complex, with a whole variety of things making communities, ecosystems, and eventually a biosphere. That's just what happens, inevitably, I think. So one of the opportunistic paths is as a strategy, is intelligence. Algae do perfectly well without a kind of intelligence that I know of. They've got a different strategy. But the nature of evolution is if there's a niche, it will get filled. And it's amazing, for example, to think about comparing the bodies of a Tasmanian wolf and a wolf of the sort of like Euro-Asian persuasion, or in North America too. Different creatures, but they look like they've been designed by the same committee. It's just there's an opportunity for something shaped like that in an ecosystem to survive, and so you get these wolves of different kinds that emerge altogether independently. Opportunism means that there will be a path, however wide or narrow, toward greater intelligence. You can't start with intelligence. It's only something that can be built up over time, because something like the brain of a mammal. I don't know how much they still talk about reptilian brain and a mammalian brain, and the cortex is a human brain. It builds, not because of a purpose, but because that's what opportunism leads to, inevitably. So ever greater intelligence, and then you get to the point where you've got something that's intelligent enough to invest in culture, which is a strategy for survival that is based on intelligence. It's the intelligence to create culture. It's the intelligence to know how to transmit culture. It's the intelligence for the next generation to know how to absorb the culture. I think that I'm really willing to make the jumps, but I'm not super confident of it. That wherever that there will be a lot of planets where you get to the point where there are lines that are based on using intelligence to survive. And there will become increasingly intelligent creatures. And I cited how I think that the dinosaurs were not as smart as the mammals that replaced them. And then primates off the mammalian line, and then dividing, and the greatest intelligence is on the part of the tree that like apes, orangutans, chimpanzees, gorillas, smarter, I think, than things on the other. But maybe the monkeys have been evolving their own kind of intelligence. It doesn't have to be. But the smartest, obviously, is on the ape line. There was a book back in the 70s calling us the naked apes. We are apes, but we took intelligence further, and we took it far enough that we took it as a way of surviving by creating culture. Maybe that's the way I don't think I said that quite right. But I think it's inevitable that the inevitable increasing intelligence will eventually find some little thread that's taking intelligence and making culture at the center of its adaptive strategy. And that was true for hunting-gathering peoples. Increasingly, the role that culture played in their lives, people who did the cave painting as one expression, evidently having language, in ways that the other apes didn't. There was a kind of a takeoff. Over some period of time, like Homo erectus or something, million to anyway, the human brain today is like 3 times as big, and it was a mutually reinforcing thing between the culture and the biology, because if you got enough generations, you select for the ones whose genes make them more equipped. So I use the idea of the human hand becoming more adept at wielding tools because, and a selective process for a certain kind of hand, and other things, but especially the brain. And then it becomes inevitable that you get to a creature that does something that no other creature was smart enough to be able to do, which is to escape from the constraints in which it had evolved. I mean, the whole nature of the ecosystem is that everything operates within the overall system. It's all been selected to be part of that sort of synergy. That's how it gets into the future. But at a certain point, culture becomes something new. And as a student of these things for the last 50 some years, I want to say that not enough attention has been paid to that step, that there was an order out of which we emerged, a natural order, which is what biological evolution creates. So that the predator and the prey interact in ways that have been selected for over the huge number of generations to be consistent with the viability of the system in the long haul. I mean, you get predation, you get parasites, you get all kinds of conflictual things. But all that conflict only works for the long haul if it operates in a way that is conducive to the system moving into the future. So you get a increasing intelligence and increasing adeptness at culture. I don't know. People talk about language getting a lot more complex before civilization. I think that the cave paintings indicate something about consciousness continuing to develop deeper in culture, but I don't really know. I'm just sort of trying to read the tea leaves. You ask Google how long has there been human language, and you get this number 50,000 years. Well, at least that's what I got when I Googled it about a year ago. I don't believe that. I think that that's wrong, but it is quite possible that there's been a kind of an acceleration of cultural development from, say, 50,000 years ago to 10 or 12,000 years ago when this new thing happens. The new thing of a creature extricating itself from that system in which it evolved. Nobody had ever done that before. Culture had never sort of broken out of it being an elaboration on the structures that went before into being a altogether new kind of life form that wasn't formed by natural selection, but was invented by the creature. The hunting-gathering societies that were cultural, and this is why it counts as a breakthrough, because it's something fundamentally different between a hunting-gathering society that's cultural and the emerging civilized society, something very, very fundamental that's different. The hunting-gathering society is still living in ways that is fundamentally continuous with what all the primate ancestors, little groups, hunting and gathering, no huge change, even though the innovations of culture sometimes change things in certain non-trivial ways, but no real breakthrough. They're still living in bands. They're still living off what nature spontaneously provides. And then you reach a point where these creative, intelligent people who are sort of a semi-inevitable emergence sometime on some line of biological evolution figure out how to change the whole structure of their lives, to develop something different from a group of primates living off of what nature spontaneously provides. The plants that they had gathered, now they're sowing and reaping. The animals they had hunted, now they are herding and becoming herders, and a completely different size and structure, as well as means of subsistence, can emerge once you break out of the niche in which you evolved biological, which is to say, in my language, to step onto the path of civilization. So I think, I don't know how inevitable it is that if you got a cultural creature, like if you looked at humankind, say 30,000 to 40,000 years ago, as our species was enduring and the Neanderthals were dying off. What would you say about, the way those creatures, our ancestors, were living? It would be a continuation of what we see in other relatives we have. Some form. We weren't necessarily, would be like chimpanzees, would be like bonobos. I just had that argument because I think we're better creatures than we say we are, and I think I can prove it. And people say, no, we're violent. The bonobo is also our ancestor, and they're really into the love fest. And it's true that you can see chimpanzees doing some violent stuff, but just what are we? We're pretty related to the gorillas too, and They're not such a bad lot. But when you extricate yourself from the niche in which you evolved biologically, you are extricating yourself from an order that had emerged from the biological process, which would be true on any other planet, I would suggest, where that evolution takes place. That biological evolution pretty much assures that everything that interacts, as much as it can, in a way, as other things change things like ice ages and asteroids and stuff. Nonetheless, it's working to make sure that the interactions are consistent with success in getting the system into the whole. That's ultimately what evolution favors, is the system surviving into the whole. But evolution doesn't look forward. There is no plan. When it creates this intelligence, and that intelligence creates this culture, and this culture then makes a breakthrough into extricating it, there's no plan. There's no looking ahead, as far as anybody can discern. It'd be nice to, I wish that I could believe that, there's some good God out there with a plan. I just don't. It looks to me, and I think it looks to science like wherever this whole thing came from, it's just been unfolding according to, some inevitable dynamics that happen, and it doesn't look forward. It has no way of making a plan. What's going to happen if we start investing in all this primate intelligence? And what's going to happen if we let this creature take this line into the future? No, nobody's asking that question. If it works, it gets there. And it worked. Somehow it worked. We made culture work, or we wouldn't be here. We got ancestors all the way back to one-celled creatures. And the first part of the trip is people who made it work. But when you extricate yourself from the niche in which you evolved biologically, you are creating something out of your own creative imagination that's a life form. It's the first one in 3.5+ billion years of evolution on Earth that is not the product of natural selection, which has certain properties of order creating. But it's a breakout. It's a break out of order, but into disorder, because there is no order waiting for civilization. There was no planning. What's it going to mean when we let these people start planting crops and herding cattle and building these larger political organizations? What's going to happen? There's nothing to ask that question. I wish there were, but anyway, I'm operating in the evolutionary perspective as I understand it. Or however much I would like there to be a God in the picture, I don't see it. And it just makes sense on the basis of what we can see. What we can see is that things have unfolded in ways that are sort of inevitable, given the inevitable dynamics of the system. And what you get when you have that breakout from the ecological order into these new life forms, they're going to have to interact with each other, but there is no order there to govern how they're going to interact. Life on Earth had not itself created anarchy until then. I mean, there's been disorder in the history of life. There's been catastrophic die-offs. But I think that they're all examples, like the end of the dinosaurs, where something beyond the control of life had a major impact on, like a crash of some kind, evolutionary crash that, like the dinosaurs, it's a huge asteroid striking the Earth off the Yucatan Peninsula, almost immediately wiping out the dinosaurs and leaving some mammalian ancestors who were, I guess, living underground, I think is the belief. This is 66 million years ago. And ice ages can be destructive. Any kind of climate change can be destructive. And other things that happen, like North and South America coming together. Life on Earth hasn't controlled the tectonic plates movements, and that can create disorder. But here, from within the living system itself, for the very first time, but inevitably, or semi-inevitably, there's this creature that has introduced a new life form that's going to be compelled to interact with each other outside of any established order. The natural order's been left behind. That's the breakthrough thing. And as for a human order, there's no means for this fragmented system of all these different little civilizing societies in the Nile Valley or Mesopotamia or the other places where it merges in clusters. There's no way that they're going to be able to agree on some order that they can, much less the one that they could enforce. So there is an anarchy there. It's of a different kind than anything that ever existed in the history of life. One of life's own offshoots has broken out of the order into a situation where these civilized societies are inevitably going to be drawn into what the philosopher of anarchy Thomas Hobbes called a war of all against all. It is inevitable, and my book back there, The Parable of the Tribes, tells a little parable that demonstrates its inevitability. Maybe I'll do that in the next video, because where I want to stop here is to show that what inevitably happens out of the evolution of life on Earth, and really inevitably happens, that I'll try to show, is there will be at some time on a planet where life has been evolving, I think maybe inevitably there will be a creature that makes the breakthrough into civilization. And at that point, I believe I can kind of prove an inevitability that a destructive force will inevitably emerge in that creature's civilizational system. That it inevitably drags that civilization to develop in ways that people would never have chosen. That's a function of the dynamics of this anarchic system, beyond the ability of these creatures that have taken this unprecedented step to change. It's a systemic force that's way bigger than anybody is able to control from the beginnings of civilization, quite inevitably. And I'll show why that's inevitable in the next video. And I also want to end by saying, to understand what we're up against in America today, and what's happening with the Ukraine invasion, and what's happening between Israel and its Iran-backed terrorist enemies, are all ramifications of this inevitably emerging destructive force. And it can be shown in an integrated picture of the story of our species, which also clarifies the challenge that we face. As we approach a fork in the road that I will try to show in a subsequent video, is an inevitable issue for any civilization creating species. Will it get its civilization ordered well enough and soon enough so that it can survive for the long haul and not end up destroying itself, as our human civilization on this planet is clearly in danger of doing? And that will be a topic of yet another video. So thanks for listening. In the next video, I will try to show the force that our creative intelligence made us subject to. It delivered many boons because of all the power that came with our creative intelligence. But it gave us, inevitably, a destructive force to contend with that would be beyond our control for generation after generation after generation, and thereby making human civilization inevitably very ugly. But the good news is, if we see why it's so ugly, and how it has nothing to do with our inborn nature, we can see ourselves as creatures with a whole lot better capability than we imagine. That by itself would have a beneficial effect on how we navigate the coming generations. Thanks.